here we go. So, how has your wife's attitude and actions influenced your faith in a positive way? Um, I would say Jen has always had a better work ethic than me, um, and she displays it in different ways than I do. She has so many different friends. Everywhere she gets, everywhere we go, and everywhere she goes, she gets friends and she keeps them. She somehow keeps in touch with 20, 30 people that she still has close relationships with through the years. And I just find that to be, amazing. That, and she's always had a heart for people, especially people that were underserved. I still remember in Chicago, back in the early years, I was still, um, I was still playing video games on Saturday mornings, and she decided to volunteer for this place that does taxes for poor people, and I stayed at home, played video games, and she didn't bother me about it. She just invited me, and when I said no, she didn't really press the issue. It only took about 2 or 3 weeks of me sitting home playing video games while she was doing taxes for poor people. When I was like, I feel like a piece of crap, like what am I doing? What kind of value am I providing? And so I eventually started coming along with her, and she didn't. It's not like she motivated me or anything. It's just like I felt that shame because she was doing something good when I wasn't on a Saturday, and I thought that was really helpful. Um, I think how has her respect encouraged me? I think her respect has encouraged me because when she chooses to not handle things and to let me know that she's going to choose to not handle things and let me handle it, there's this, I guess, this belief that yes, I can do it and that I'm supposed to do it. And if I don't do it, it's not going to get done, and that's on me. And that's that actually is really helpful for me. Um, she could easily do some of the things that I do, um, especially some of the situations that I've had to handle throughout the marriage. It's like it's been good for me to have to grow through it, even though she probably could have done it herself. But if she would take on too much, I think if she would take on too much more of a load than she should have, then she would have lost some respect and maybe even some attractiveness for me. But her allowing me to make mistakes and muddle through things and think about things at my own pace and do things in my own way has been really great. Um, so finally, how has she helped you grow as a Christian man? Um, I think she's helped me see parts of myself that I lack, like the ability to connect with people, the ability to just the importance of relationships, the importance of really considering people's emotions and tenderness and some of that stuff that I just didn't get growing up, and it just hasn't been nurtured within me. And I think that's been really great. So there we go.
Hi, I'm going to share just a couple of thoughts I have on mutual submission and what it looks like. In my marriage, I wrote down a few things, and that doesn't make them any less sincere, but it's my gift to you as the listener, because if I were to speak off the cuff, I could probably ramble. I'm very good at that. So the idea of mutual submission is a really important one. It's one that Brian takes very seriously, as well as myself. But from the perspective of being his wife, his intentionality in deeply knowing and understanding me has given me the freedom to be my complete and vulnerable self with him. And so knowing me as he does, he not only loves what we have in common, but he respects and loves what makes me different from him. He's humble enough to recognize and praise strengths and talents that I have that he doesn't, and he encourages me to use them rather than being threatened by them. So in doing so, he honors and respects me as his partner, knowing that he strives to keep my needs at the forefront of his mind while viewing me as a complete person with plenty to offer makes it easier for me to reconcile the idea of mutual submission into my life and into my marriage. Because if he is putting me first and I am putting him first, then we aren't exhausted at trying to take care of ourselves while taking care of the other person.
Hey everybody, Brian Hofsummer here. Just had a few, shall we say, comments, observations that might help clear up the idea of submitting to your husbands and husbands submitting to your wives. I find the text to be helpful, but it tends to be overly broad. And what people often lack is real-world experience, real-world like application to the text. And without that, I think these texts tend to be some of the most misused because they're applied as more of a cudgel or something like a blunt object to beat your spouse with, rather than something helpful to guide. I think the first thing I would say is the number one thing I see in my own marriage counseling is that I often, and by often I mean almost always, have to tell husbands to stop avoiding things. They avoid their wives, they avoid responsibility, they avoid dealing with things. That's generally speaking what I have to tell husbands to do. That's the category. With women, it's often different. I don't have to tell them to stop avoiding things. Normally, they have to let things go. They feel a sense of vulnerability in just being married and having a family, and that level of vulnerability is difficult for them to handle. They have a hard time a lot of times with an idea that somebody can be in their life and can mess things up and you can't do a thing about it and you have to trust them. It's part of why I think if you go and look in the book of Genesis with the curse, a lot of it has to do with things like going through childhood and having your husband as your master, like lording over you. It's like, yeah, those are really hard things to handle. I think mastering your vulnerability and figuring out what to do with that is one of the major keys in being married as a wife. I think things have changed a lot over the last 100 years. I mean, it used to be that the gender roles were really set, but now men just are not as useful. I mean, women can make their own income if they want to. And they're asking lots of great questions, and it's great to have them in the workforce. But we still haven't settled out on what that all means. And so a lot of the gender roles are in flux. And going and rereading these scriptures, I think, is difficult. It takes a new lens. You have to look at culture and what's happening and see how to apply it. Because submission is no longer as necessary as it used to be. People aren't even having kids at the rate they used to. And a lot of the language revolving around marriage assumes that there's 2 kids or 3 kids or however many kids that need a high level of work in order to and partnership in order to really get a grip on. People are just not having kids sometimes these days. And frankly, the homework is a lot easier. I know it. I'm a stay-at-home dad. I have a washing machine. I have prepackaged meals. I have Target, you know. I think the women of older days, they had to make their own clothing and make all their meals from scratch and take care of their kids. And, you know, they had generations, like they had the grandparents to help. And now we don't have grandparents, but it's a lot easier and more boring. I know, Sarah. Sorry about that little interruption there. I'm still taking care of my 2 little girls. Anyway, so here's one of the major conundrums that I find based on those 2 ideas of the avoidance and the vulnerability, is often that women feel vulnerable and they don't leave it to chance that their husband's going to do the right thing. And so what they do is this weird thing where they say, well, I want you to take the lead. I want you to do this. I want you to do that. I want you to take ownership, but I don't feel comfortable letting you do that. So I'm going to teach you how to do it. I'm going to do one of the things that I'm biologically designed to do, which is parenting, and I'm going to treat you like a 5-year-old. And I'm going to coach you, and I'm going to motivate you. And what usually happens is that the guy, rather than being coached or rather being taught, he puts his hand back, and he's like, all right, I'll let you do it. Okay. And they become useless. And then that actually reinforces a pattern where the woman, the wife sits there and says, hey, you're useless. Let me do more. What are you doing here? Like, I don't need you, right? And she ends up doing 80, 90% of the work in regards to the family, and he ends up doing 10%. Let me give you an analogy on how this normally works out. So early in the marriage, I would be driving, my wife would be in the passenger seat, and she was nervous about me, my driving, because I'm a faster driver. I stop a little quicker, I accelerate quicker. And she got in the habit of pointing out things that she thought I may have missed. And, red lights, squirrels, cars coming up my blind side, those sorts of things. And one of the things I noticed is that I'm a much worse driver with my wife in the car when she's doing that. And what I noticed is I was listening to her voice more than I was actually trying to drive. I stopped trusting in my own ability to drive. And I've only been in maybe like one accident my whole life. It's not like I'm a horrible driver or anything, But I noticed I was missing things because I was waiting for her to call things out rather than figure it out for myself. And so finally I just called her out and I said, hey, we can't do this. I'm a much worse driver with you in the car. And when she stopped commenting on things, I regained my driving, my confidence in driving. And I think it's the same thing in marriage. I know that my wife is, she's vulnerable to my parenting mistakes and my ability as a husband. And for her to point out things but not try to fix them for me, for her to tell me how she's vulnerable and how she's affected or how the kids are affected is helpful to me. But for her to try not to fix them for me, try not to teach me how to be a husband, is really helpful. Just like I don't try to really teach her how to be a wife. I don't think that would go over very well, really. Just a couple more things and then I'll finish up. I think there's a wonderful, it's funny. Proverbs 21:9 says, it's better to live on a corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. I think it's kind of just a funny imagery of a guy living on the corner of the roof. And this is often what happens. It's actually a pretty accurate picture of marriage when it's not going well, is that the wife is feeling vulnerable and she feels a lot of anger and a lot of fear, and she takes it out on her husband. She gets very judgmental and critical, and the guy just can't handle it, doesn't know how to win, doesn't know how to be successful in those circumstances, can't keep his wife happy, and so chooses to leave, like emotionally, physically. And I usually, I tend to challenge both the wife, like, gosh, you got to be easier on this guy. Allow him to make mistakes, hand over some things to him that should be his. And to the guy, I say, dude, what are you doing on the top of the roof? Go back in the house. Go confront your wife. Go work things out with her. Take her seriously and come to an agreement. So I often give this advice to women who are trying to negotiate this idea of submission, which I think has a lot to do with vulnerability. Embrace your vulnerability. It's there. Control anger, control fear. They rarely serve anybody in marriage. Treat your husband kindly. Allow your husband to make mistakes. Even point some things out that he might be missing, but try to point in a cause and effect language, because it's just very respectful. Me, like maybe most guys, we miss it. We don't always know. And it's helpful to hear things like, when you do this, did you notice that this happens? Rather than get criticized with a, stop doing that. That's stupid. Why would you do that kind of language? So I hope that's helpful. If you need anything else, please let me know. All right, take care. God bless. Bye.